and they mummified, or they put him in a sandpit burial for 30 days. It dried out his body, and then they finished the rest of the mummification, like wrapping process and everything, and they buried him in the fashion of an ancient Egyptian.
Next podcast then.
Yeah, but a very loose interpretation of what their heaven would be like was living on the Nile again. Living on the Nile again with all the things you wanted in the next world. You were going to be at least they hoped you were going to be a higher class citizen than you were.
You move up a bit. There you go.
Yeah. You would have these little statues, these little statuettes that you might be buried with that would be like these little magical people who would really just be your slaves in the next world. But they were magical people that were going to help you farm. They were going to help you go fishing. They were going to help you just do all the things. You still had to do all the things you did in this world. You were still going to be a wheat and barley farmer like 99% of people were in Egypt. But this time you'd have slaves working under you so you can go fishing more. It's just a better life, and it would last forever. And they prepared for that for their whole life. And they spent a lot of time and went to great lengths investing in what their tombs would be like to prepare for the next world, So that's what they thought that their heaven was going to be like, just a continuation of the wonderful place that they already lived in. That is what meant, that's like they knew how special Egypt was.
Got it. But you were saying, we got into this because you were saying that someone as low as a slave would be dumped into a hole, basically.
Yes.
People, let's look at people above slaves who weren't, literally there against their will, but lower class people. They're just put into a hole, and whatever happens.
Yeah. So you have, you have less expensive real estate along the you have these huge necropoli, which a necropolis is basically a city for the dead. An acropolis would be like Memphis, Egypt. It'd be like New York City. Right. That's a necropolis. A necropolis means a dead city. And so you have these cities for the dead. And, the closer you get to city center, the more expensive it becomes to actually build there. So if you're really, really poor, you are put in, and you want a little bit of security for your tomb, they dig this shaft that's probably 2 feet by 2 feet wide by 6 or 7 feet deep, and you're put into you're mummified, you're embalmed because you probably save up to afford that, and then you're mummified, and rather than put into a stone sarcophagus, you may just be put into a wooden sarcophagus, and your buddy who kind of knew how to write magical inscriptions and spells to bless you in the next world, to give you some comforts in the next world, to bring things with you in the next world. You inscribe these magical spells along the inside of your coffin, along the outside of it. And rather than being slid into a wall, or rather than having something dug down into the ground where there's a chamber at the bottom where people can maybe walk in and visit you, or you have this big open room that your sarcophagus sits in, your sarcophagus is lowered up and down straight into a hole in the ground. And then that hole is, maybe there's a place block that they place on top of that and then cover it with dirt so it just disappears. No one knows where it's at. That's like your middle class, your middle class guy can afford something like that in the next world.
Yeah, it's interesting though with this whole topic. First of all, the fact that they were embalming people back then. We're going back. We're in 2600 or whatever right now.
Sure.
So we're back thousands of years. The being able to figure out to do that at all is incredible. And it's also interesting because we are a unique species that does this. There's no other species that buries their dead. You die, and the natural process of your body coming a part of the earth again happens. But we, for thousands and thousands of years across many different civilizations and cultures, have these customs where we literally take the body and we use real estate. This is what real estate.
Yeah.
To put it down in there. And it's just so fascinating to me that back in times where people had to worry about where they were going to take a shit that day.
Sure.
They're even in a high class society like Egypt, they're thinking about the relics of honoring people in death to the point that they're they're dead living in places that were better than where they even lived while they were here.
Yeah,
that is fucking wild to me.
It's like part of the human condition. It's just, it's never enough.
Yeah. And you also, the other point is you talk about them figuring out the importance of dry burial and everything. I never thought about any of this stuff, But Joseph Scott Morgan, who I've had in here a few times, episode 146, and then he was in here for episode 170 and 171, talking about the JFK stuff. But the first time he was in here in episode 146, this guy, for people who haven't seen those episodes, he's fucking amazing. He's like the death investigator on TV. So anytime there's a case, he's coming on and breaking it down. And he had written like a very, very highly rated book years ago. It's like the best book ever written by someone from the death investigation side, and breaking down the forensics of everything and what you got to look at. And so obviously in his career he deals with a lot of things that have to do with burials and exhuming graves and stuff like that. And one of the things he was talking about in episode 146 is the power of water in Mother Nature and what it does if that is able to get into a body. It just destroys everything in its wake. And we don't think of it that way because, we're like, oh, we're drinking water right now. It's a part of us and everything. But man, in nature, holy shit. Yeah. So for them to realize that, literally just something as simple as keeping it far away from water, you would think, oh, heat, it's going to like wither away the body. There's no, and there's no fluids in the area. It goes against what you would think, but in death, it makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. Did you know that in the last, so let me think, the practice of mummification, it ends sometime around the end of the Roman era in Egypt. So, the Romans, I think that Egypt is a part of the Roman Empire until 641 AD. So it's part of the Roman Empire for a significant amount of time, like 671 years, I'm pretty sure. Around the end of that time, maybe the Christian era, until the Christian era of Egypt around 300 AD, they were still mummifying people, but that eventually ends because it's seen as a pagan practice. But since then, in the last 1,700 years, as far as we know, only one person has been mummified in the same manner of an ancient Egyptian, and it happened on TV like 30 years ago. It was this documentary called Mr. Mummy, and this Egyptologist, Dr. Bob Breyer, who specializes in mummification, somehow got permission to use a cadaver, a dead person. Maybe he got explicit permission from the person before they died, and he mummified this person and buried them in the same fashion, or he mummified this person, basically buried them in a sandpit burial. But this was all done in a lab to kind of mimic the conditions of Egypt, and they mummified, or they put him in a sandpit burial for 30 days. It dried out his body, and then they finished the rest of the mummification, like wrapping process and everything, and they buried him in the fashion of an ancient Egyptian. You would for anybody watching the documentary, it's like 25 minutes long. It's called Mr. Mummy. It was a TV special, and so in the last 2,000 years, only one person has been mummified in the manner of an Egyptian. So the reason that we think that pyramids exist in the way that they do, following this logic, you can kind of see where this is going. It gets to a point where one single man is so powerful that he can commission an entire country to get behind his burial. What else is he going to spend his money on? You also have to get the Egyptian people to do something. You can't just Egypt is so rich, and they're producing, one man can produce so much grain on his farm that he can feed, I don't know what the statistic is exactly, but one man can feed like 100 men from his farm. So you get to a point where you have all this farmland, and you have such an excess amount of food that there's a lot of people in Egypt who are not doing anything to contribute to the economy. So as a pharaoh, you got to do two things. You got to create a labor force, and you got to create an army to employ people, because you have all this surplus wealth, right? And when you have a bunch of people sitting around doing nothing, it doesn't do anything good. You have subtle instability kind of creeps in. So the pharaohs build an army. They also establish a workforce that is constantly doing something, constantly building a temple. Look at Rome. You can only imagine how many empty temples and forums there were in Rome.
Oh, yeah.
And look all around the Roman Empire. Every time a Roman emperor came in, it was his job to the country to build new temples for the glory of Rome. But really, it's to keep people busy. You have all this money, you got to keep them in line, because otherwise they're not serving you, right? They're not your they're not your servants. They're not your people. If you're not employing them and paying them, you got to keep their obedience and keep their loyalty. So the Pharaoh has to do the same thing. You know, all this is a playbook. Like the Romans picked up the playbook from the Greeks, who picked it up from the Egyptians. This Roman emperors are just the next era of what the Pharaohs were.
Yes, I think that's fair.
Yeah, and so you know you have to keep people doing something. Why am I at this point?
Well, we're going through the timeline. We were talking all about.
I'm sorry. Yeah, you can cut that. Sorry.
It's staying.
Yeah, I've got so many rabbit holes.
It's all right.
So the Pharaoh, just like Roman emperors later on, and Roman emperors wrote down exactly why they did these things, and it makes sense. So we can only assume Pharaohs are doing the same thing. So you got to keep people employed. And so it's a perfect reason to employ a bunch of people to build your tomb, right?
Yes. Which pharaoh was this again?
I mean, we assume all of them.
Well, all of them.
Yeah,
but which one are we starting with?
We're right at Zoser.
Yeah,
we've covered all this space, and we kind of understand how the economy is coming together. And this guy needs to employ, and you know, this may be the moment where they had the realization, 2700 BC, when he has the dream that Egypt isn't doing well, probably some instability. This may be the moment when they realized, oh, we need we have all these people, because we have all this grain, we have all these people sitting around benefiting from society but not contributing directly to it. Well, okay, let's just organize a massive labor project. Like let's fund all these people, so give them an actual job to do, and let's build something great. And so it's a way to provide some stability for Egypt. And so the great architect Imhotep, he essentially comes up with this plan. If you pull up the mastaba one more time.
That's what we were just looking at.
Yeah. If you pull up the mastaba one more time, he comes up with this great plan to build this mega structure. And basically what it is it was originally a mastaba, which was, originally it's a 3x1 structure. So, you know, it's 3 units of measurement long, 1 unit of measurement deep. Well, eventually they turn that into a giant square and they make it long, right? It's this huge expanding structure, but it's only one level. And they think, this isn't as impressive enough. Let's put another one on top of it. So if you go to the step pyramid, it's on there. It's the second one. So you see how the step pyramid is just 6 mastabas all stacked on top of each other in descending order. So they figure, why don't we just take a one mastaba and stack another one on top of it? Oh, that's pretty cool. Let's stack another one on there. Let's do it again. And they do it 6 times, and they create this they create the biggest building on the entire planet by doing this.
What's that Snoopy meme? I'll fucking do it again.
yeah. So this is what that is. And keep in mind, there's a lot of the people that are standing in front of this photo is not giving you a great perspective of how actually gigantic this thing is. I mean, they are standing about 200 yards away from the pyramid on that photo.
Wow.
I mean, these buildings in front,
they're pretty sizable.
They're absolutely gigantic, and these are still about 100 yards from the pyramid. I mean, that thing really is truly gigantic. And one of the ways that we know without a shadow of a doubt that what they were doing was they originally built a mastaba at the core of this structure, and then they just expanded it, was when you walk along the side. I had the realization while we were there. I was standing next to Told in Stone. He and I are looking at the pyramid, and I go, oh, that's the original mastaba right there. And you look at the side of it where, later archaeologists have torn off the foundations or they've been quarried away. So many things have happened to these pyramids. So many people have violated them for one reason or another. The original slanting, sloping exterior wall of the original mastaba is still inside the structure. You can see the casing stones slanting down the lowest layer. You can see the remnant. Like if you were to pull everything off, you could leave the original building still standing there, and you can see it from the side.
How thick is that wall? How thick in terms of the stones they're using?
Well, okay, do you mean casing stone or the actual wall between, like, here's the wall and then here's the inner chamber?
Actually, yeah, the second one. Yeah.
50 or 60 feet. Yeah. Yeah. Now that's not the blocks, right? But that's how thick the pyramid is.
Bro, if you put a bomb outside there, you might not get all the way through
You
it.
wouldn't. You definitely wouldn't. I mean, and they tried to blow their way into multiple pyramids using dynamite, and they couldn't do it. Whoa. So the structure on the inside of this, you probably walk, 50, 60 feet might be underestimating it. There is a tunnel in here that the Persians later carved out, maybe around 500 BC. And I mean, you walk along that thing for 100 feet or so until you even get to the first chamber. And so there's this huge cathedral chamber that actually runs up the center of it, and it leads to this rock cut tomb that's under the ground. And so another idea for, when I was saying at first, before they started building the pyramid up and they're building it long, the precipice for that idea could be that, some of those mastabas where I was telling you that it's a stone building that's on top of the hole in the ground, the shaft in the ground where the tomb is buried. Well, what we found evidence for is that people decided tomb raiders. I mean, Egyptians have been tomb raiders since tombs existed. They have always looted their own tombs. That's a fact. And they were very creative with how they did it. And that's almost like sometimes as impressive as just the tombs themselves and these giant structures that they build, is just they figure out every way to break into them after they built them. And so they dig these tombs. Basically what they do is people build this huge stone building with this long shaft, tunnel, burial chamber, and because they think it's so secure, they put a lot of riches down there. And this guy's like, nobody's ever going to get to this. I'm going to put all of my wealth down here because no one's ever going to violate my tomb. I'm going to have all of this in the afterlife. And the Egyptians come and they see this big building. They go find one of the guys that helped build it. And then they go, we'll pay you to tell us how you built this. And they go, well, there's this big chamber down at the bottom. You had stonemasons guilds, and probably what you had was people working in the stonemasons guilds, like us three right here. We work as part of the team, and we get paid pretty good for it because it's a high paying job. It'll pay even better if we come back and raid this thing because we know exactly how to do it, and then we go sell all the stuff that we've stolen.
Thank you for watching the video, guys. If you haven't already subscribed, please smash that subscribe button and check out this clip's full podcast episode by clicking here or in the description below.